It's time for Wretched Radio with Todd Friel.
Ben. This is Wretched Radio. Not using a past tense of a be verb. I'm talking about Ben Shapiro. He's a fellow that a whole lot of evangelicals love to watch. He's a whip smart fellow, very smart, has a lot of good things to say. But Ben, appearing at some sort of symposium. I believe this was at Liberty University. Regardless, an evangelical stood up and said, all right, Ben Shapiro, you are an Orthodox Jewish fellow. Where do you stand on the book of Genesis? Ken Ham's ears perked up, naturally. And Ben Shapiro went about the business of explaining why he somehow is able to smush his belief in the book of Genesis with evolution, an old earth position. Thought we should listen to what Ben Shapiro had to say so that we can determine, is he being biblical, or has he somehow done something to what is clearly written in the beginning? God created the heavens and the earth. In the beginning, he did. In the evening and the morning, day 1. In the evening and the morning, day 2. The evening and the morning, day 3. Somehow that has been not clear enough for Ben Shapiro, and he's not the only fellow who thinks like that. So let's give a listen to Ben Shapiro's take on how it is that he harmonizes evolution with the book of Genesis so that you and I can, well, let's just say, do a little better with our handling of the book of Genesis.
The way that I draw an allegorical approach to particularly the first couple of chapters of Genesis.
Hold on. He draws an allegorical approach. In other words, an allegory being something that didn't actually happen, but there are lessons to be learned from it. Now, this is slightly different than a parable. It is set up as a story. I'm going to tell you a story now, and there's going to be one message, one lesson from it. An allegorical approach, and the Bible has absolutely zero allegories. Zero, none. They have parables. There can be lessons to be learned from stories, but all of the Old Testament is cited as actual fact. It actually happened like this. When Jesus was asked about the subject of marriage, he said, "Have you not heard? In the beginning," what was he citing? An allegory? No, he was citing an historical understanding of the book of Genesis. So out of the gate, we understand that Ben Shapiro has an allegorical approach. Question: does Genesis 1, 2, 3, and all the way through chapter 11 lend itself toward that? Ask yourself the question, why would Moses write a book of history that started 11 chapters in, 12 chapters in? Where does it say in the book of Genesis, okay, all this stuff that you've been hearing about creation and about Cain and Abel, that you've been hearing about the Tower of Babel, that you've been hearing about Noah's Ark, those are just fanciful tales that you're supposed to draw some general principles from. Now we're going to get to the history of the world. Can you think of anywhere where the Bible indicates that, specifically by the author himself? And the answer, I believe, of course, is no. He wrote the entire book of Genesis as historical narrative.
The way that I draw an allegorical approach to particularly the first couple of chapters of Genesis is because the first couple chapters of Genesis, in my opinion, are obviously written with an eye toward allegory. So,
okay, hold on. Obviously? What makes that obvious? In fact, every single Hebrew scholar of a classical school would tell you, no, it's actually written with enough detail that it's clearly historical narrative. For instance, when you have names of things, when you have descriptors of specific things, it is tying it to reality.
Example, it says at the beginning of the book of Genesis, Vayhi Or, Yom Echad, right? This is the day 1, right? And then it'll say that there was day 2. Well, so first of all, God creates light before he creates the sun.
Okay, this is an old argument. God creates light before the sun. And what he's going to get into is the length of a day is determined by what? What determines time? Who is the one who has established this is the length of the day? Was it the planets that determined that, or was it God? You don't need the planets to determine a day. You need planets to mark the days, but God is the one who determined the days. A spinning of the ball and a total rotation, but that was determined. God said it is going to last this long. This is the length of the day. It is not the planets that determine how long a day is. It is God. And so before there were planets on day 4, moon, star, sun, it doesn't matter because they are simple markers for it. God is the one he's the establishment of time. What power or authority do the planets have? Furthermore, they're created also. And who created those planets that marked it as 24 hours? God.
Second of all, how do you measure the length of a day?
God. That's how you measure the length of a day. God established it. He simply put markers to help us to do that specific, so that we've got a visible measuring of it, the planets.
When there is no sun and no earth. So the way that we measure an Earth day is by the rotation of the Earth versus the sun, right? But how do you measure a 24-hour period in a time when hours don't exist yet, and there is no basis for the length of the day?
Once again, God is the establisher of time. The planets are the markers. They did not determine it. And what does that mean? How did that work? How did that work anyway? There were no planets. There were no moon, star, suns. Or am I just supposed to believe that any order gets thrown out the window because there was no marking of time until day 4? No, he can't harmonize that in any credible way with order of events in the book of Genesis, but he continues.
There are 2 Genesis accounts, right? There's the Genesis account that talks about the creation of various things on various days, and then talks about the creation of man on day 6. And then the Bible goes back, and then it talks specifically about the creation of Adam and Eve on day 6. So why does it bother to tell the story twice if there's no allegory to it and there's no deeper meaning to it than just it's a story about a man and a woman eating an apple?
Well, there are options, and that God wanted to give different detail and different emphasis. Simple as that. And needing that detail, the difference in understanding of where humanity fits in the schema, the rank and order, we need a more detailed retelling. That does not have to be the natural conclusion. Why would there be 2 same story, just kind of a different emphasis? Why do we need 4 gospels? Same story, different emphasis. Same thing is true with the creation accounts. This isn't that complex, and I'm kind of disappointed because, Ben, these are the arguments. These have been dealt with long time ago.
Also, I tend to believe in the sort of Maimonidean approach and the.
By the way, if you're not familiar with Maimonides, he's well worth at least being aware of. I believe 12th century Jewish rabbi. He is esteemed as probably the preeminent rabbi, perhaps even of all time. They love to quote Maimonides.
Also, I tend to believe in the sort of Maimonidean approach and the Thomas Aquinas approach to this, frankly, which is that if there is a lack of convergence between faith and reason, then you're getting one or the other wrong.
Okay, so which one wins? And let's just put it a little bit more boldly. Forget faith and reason for a moment. Let's talk faith and science. And by the way, let's remember, looking back in the past isn't science, it's observation. And I have the same advantage as anybody else living in the 21st century because we can't go back and test it in a laboratory. And we can't recreate it. We don't have the time for that. And so it's not science. We look back and we try to figure out what might have happened. That goes for both the creationist and the evolutionist. We weren't there, but there is somebody who was, God. And he inspired Moses to write down exactly the details that he wants us to know. Not in every single detail, certainly, but enough to know that he made the place. And so what trumps when things seem to contradict? Who wins, the Bible or science? Answer, the Bible. What trumps science or reason and the Bible? To Ben, it's quite obvious. Science and reason are superior to Bible.
Right, because if God created both, if God created science and he created faith, there really should not be a conflict between them. And if you can't misinterpret the science, right, if the science is clear enough, then you have to start looking at whether you've misinterpreted a text.
Ben Shapiro is a 6-foot-tall Presbyterian woman. There you go. That's what Ben Shapiro is. That's my observation. That's my conclusion. And somehow Ben is suggesting, well, now one has to trump the other. So who trumps? Who wins? That's my observation of Ben. Ben is going to say, no, I'm about a 5-foot, 4-inch male Jewish man. Who wins? And the answer is that the object, the one who is it, or the one who did it. Do I put my trust in science, logic, and reason, or do I put my trust in the Bible? Here's what you just saw from Ben. He's a fellow who appears to have some sort of a high view of Scripture, and yet, in this particular instance, he has allowed the scientific community, which is historical science, is not science at all, to force him to reinterpret Genesis. This is Wretched Radio.